everyone, and welcome to the APS webinar on Physics Graduate School, Tips for Applying. I'm Breon Clash, the APS Bridge Program Coordinator, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you for joining us. Today's presentation will cover things you need to know about applying for graduate school and will be led by Dr. Geraldine Cochran. After Geraldine finishes her presentation, the rest of the time will be dedicated to a question and answer session. We have a special guest today, Dr. Lance Cooper. He is the Associate Head for Graduate Programs in the Physics Department at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Cooper will be answering specific questions you may have about admissions to a physics graduate program. You can ask questions at any time during the webinar by typing them into the questions panel located on the right side of the screen. When you do submit your questions, please make sure to send them to all. In the interest of saving as much time as possible for the Q&A portion, we will not read your questions during the presentation unless they help clarify something in the presentation. We'll try to address each question, but we apologize if we don't get to all of them. A link to the recording of today's presentation will be emailed to you after today's event. The webinar will be moderated by Dr. Erica Alexander Brown, Bridge Program Project Manager. Dr. Brown earned her BS in psychology from the all-women's HBCU Spelman College. She also holds an MS and PhD in experimental psychology from Brown University. As a postdoctoral fellow, she conducted research in cell biology at Emory University, while simultaneously teaching and developing several courses at Spelman. Dr. Brown has experience in mentoring students in research and in the classroom, and is passionate about helping students thrive in academic careers. With that, I will pass you along to Erica.
Thanks, Breon. I'm Erica. I'd like to introduce our primary speakers for this evening, Dr. Lance Cooper and Dr. Geraldine Cochran. Dr. Cooper is Professor of Physics and APS Fellow and has been a chair of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign's Department of Physics Graduate Education Committee since 2003. Dr. Cooper also runs a physics grad student blog with job, fellowship, academic deadlines, and other information of interest to graduate students, as well as the Physics Career Seminar at UI-UC. Dr. Geraldine Cochran is the Assistant Dean at the Douglas Residential College of Rutgers University, and she actually formerly served as the APS Bridge Program Manager, so some of you may have met Geraldine before. Dr. Cochran has also served as the Associate Director of the Multicultural Center for Academic Success at Rochester Institute of Technology. She completed her PhD at Florida International University, where she studied the teaching and learning of physics, with particular emphasis on how to best prepare future high school physics teachers. Dr. Cochran is the past chair of several committees, including the Committee on Minorities in Physics for the American Association of Physics Teachers, past chair of AAPT's Committee on Women in Physics. She's also the current member of the American Institute of Physics Liaison Committee on Underrepresented Minorities in Physics, and she's also the current co-chair of the Committee on Women in Physics for the National Society of Black Physicists. And without further ado, I give you Dr. Geraldine Cochran.
Thank you for the introduction, Erica. Let me start this slideshow. All right. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. All right, so I'm going to jump right into the presentation, and as Erica mentioned, we'll have question and answer afterwards. So the things that we're going to go through in the presentation are here on the agenda. We'll talk about common application requirements. We'll talk about a personal statement, research statements, and diversity statements. Not every school will require all of these. So we'll kind of talk about what you should put into the application or into the statements if your institution does or doesn't require them. We'll talk about letters of recommendation, We will talk about transcripts and GRE scores, and then finally we'll talk about a timeline for getting everything in.
Geraldine, sorry, this is Erica. We can't see your presentation.
You can't see it. Uh-oh. My screen isn't sharing. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so this was the agenda with the topics that I mentioned. These are the common application components. So usually you're asked for your transcripts, GRE scores, research statement. Some schools will ask, I should say, for a research statement. Most will ask for a personal statement. You'll definitely need letters of recommendation. Some schools will ask for a diversity statement, and then other schools may ask for a writing sample. Starting off with your personal statement, what do you want to include? Well, your personal statement really is your chance to tell your story. It's the chance to explain any weaknesses that you might have in your overall application, and definitely the chance to highlight all of your strengths. So think about what would actually make your application stand out. Why did you choose that institution? Committees want to know, like, why are you applying to their school rather than the many other options that you have as far as graduate physics programs. So you want to speak to that in your statement. And then keep in mind that it's not just about being a good person, it's about being a good student, a good researcher, a good worker, and a team player. And I say that because there may be really awesome things you're doing, like, I don't know, you might be volunteering at like a pet shelter or something like that. That's really great. That's awesome. But is that something you want to put in your personal statement? Usually your personal statements are going to have a maximum page limit. So that only gives you so much time, and there are a lot of things that you want to speak to. So you want to talk about your academic ability. You want to be able to prove within that statement that you're a good researcher, a good worker, like I say, and also a team player. So that's the things that you want to make sure that you put in there. And again, with a limited amount of space, I would say definitely include this. Now we're going to talk about some of the other statements that not every school requires, like the research statement and the diversity statement. So what I'm going to say about that applies to the personal statement as well if the school doesn't require those statements, because those are things that the admissions committee is going to want to know. But if they don't actually give you space, require another statement, you won't have any other place to put it other than the personal statement. I'm going to just pause right now and see if anybody else wants to add anything in regard to the personal statement before I continue. Okay, I did a 10-second wait, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Your research statement. This is your chance to explain your promise as a PhD researcher. So obviously any past experience that you have in research, you want to talk about in this statement. But you also want to talk about future experience. Like I mentioned in the previous statement, they want to know why you're at their school. So you want to check out the school website and look at the research that the faculty at that department are doing. Discuss projects that they're doing that you're interested in. Explain why you're interested in that topic. And, regardless of the amount of research experience you have from your undergraduate career, talk about the skills that you gain. What did you learn to do in the lab? Both of those things you want to put into this statement. And then, of course, you want to mention any tangible results when it comes to your research experience. So if you did presentations locally or nationally, or if you actually have a publication from your research, then you want to include that in the statement as well. And again, what I say here for the research statement applies to the personal statement if the institution doesn't give you space to put in a separate research statement. I'm going to pause again and see if there's anything else anybody wants to add for the research statement.
Well, I'll just emphasize what Geraldine already said, that it's important to use these statements as an opportunity to describe aspects of yourself that the committees can't find elsewhere. For example, the GRE scores or your transcripts. So you need to be able to speak to things that they're going to want to know about, but they can't obtained from other areas. So in particular, the research experience is particularly important because that's something other than the recommendation letters we can't get information about from other aspects of your application. So it's very important to touch on your research experience, your enjoyment of research, why you're interested in the institutions you're applying to, that kind of thing.
Okay, any additional comments? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. A diversity statement. This is becoming actually more common as an application requirement. I know last year I had quite a few students reach out to me asking how to write this kind of statement because it was a requirement for admissions to particular institutions. In writing the diversity statement, things to keep in mind, it's not just about you as a person being of an underrepresented group, but it's more about you contributing to an inclusive environment. So if you are a member of an underrepresented group, you may want to include that in your statement, but you definitely want to discuss ways that you have influenced others. Describe your personal commitment to diversity. If you were involved in any organizations as an undergraduate, if you mentored students, or maybe addressed issues that were going on in your campus, impacted policies. These are the kind of things that I can think of actually encouraging students that ask me about it to write in the diversity statement. But these are the kind of things that you would want to put in there. Again, you want to think about like how you could overall contribute to an inclusive environment on campus through your action, in addition to like being there. Again, as I mentioned with the research statement, not every institution requires this. So if the institution doesn't require this, this is something else that you want to find a way to put into that personal statement. So that's why I say the personal statement is like really important because you only have, like I say, so much space, and you want to make sure that you speak to all these other things if a separate statement isn't required. Anybody else want to add anything to this slide? Okay. Letters of recommendation. Most important advice I think we could give regarding the letters of recommendation is to ask early. You want to give recommenders plenty of time to put these together, at least 3 weeks. And provide them with what they need to write. You want whatever they write in that letter to corroborate what you wrote in your personal statement or your research statement or some other area. So give them what you wrote, and they can, like, they'll be able to like connect directly to what you said. Also, try to diversify what's going to be coming out of your research letter. So what you may want to do, something I recommend, ask one person to focus on your research capabilities. Then ask another person, say, you know, you really know me in this setting, so research, so I'd like you to focus on research. Write me a letter of recommendation focusing on research. Someone else might speak to your grit, tenacity, or your ability to see things through. You might want to ask one of the professors who you had for class to speak to your academic ability. So what you want to avoid is having, let's say you have 3 letters of recommendation, every person saying the same thing, and nobody speaking to an area of your application that you want to kind of have sort of, like I say, have them corroborate what you said. So you don't want all 3 that talk about, hey, this student was really great in class, and you know they did well on assignments, or you know something like that. You don't want everyone to speak to your academic ability. You want someone to kind of speak to each of the 3 areas. Also, keep in mind that admissions committees want to hear from people who speak their language. So they are going to be looking for letters of recommendation from research advisors and professors and things like that. You definitely don't want to put in your application and you have no letters of recommendation from faculty. I often have students ask me to write a letter of recommendation because I've served as sort of a mentor, or I have a personal relationship with them, in that I've like supported them through other programs, but not necessarily in the classroom. And I'm always happy to do that, and I'm sure others are happy to do that. But you don't, again, want to have all of your recommenders be folks who don't know you in the kind of traditional academic setting, you definitely want to include some of your professors, because otherwise it might look like a red flag in your application that something is wrong. Anybody else want to add anything to this slide?
So I'll just emphasize again the importance of having people write something in the letters that go beyond what they can already see in your transcript. So an instructor, for example, who will only comment on a grade you got in their class is less useful, because we can already see what your transcripts tell us about your grades. So we particularly need to get letters from people who can comment on your research ability, since graduate school is about research. If you do get an instructor, it's better if we get somebody who can comment on things beyond your grade, like a project you worked on, or, as Geraldine said, your how well you work, your ability to collaborate with people, your ability to tackle tough problems, something that goes beyond the mere grade.
I just wanted to add, be particularly careful in the language that you use to ask for recommendations. I always advise students to ask for a strong letter of recommendation, verbatim. Because what you don't want is to get to ask for a letter from someone who isn't excited about you, who isn't excited about the fact that you're applying to graduate school, and they submit a meh recommendation letter because they don't want to tell you no. Or even worse, you choose someone that you know you don't really have a lot of rapport with, and they write you a bad letter of recommendation. You do not want that. So when you ask for can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? Those who say, yes, I can do that, you can probably trust that they can. And most professors will be honest with you if they cannot. No, I can't write you a strong letter of recommendation. But just keep that in mind when you're choosing your recommenders and when you're asking them.
All right, I'm going to go on to the next slide. Transcripts and GRE scores. You don't want to have your application be considered incomplete because you're missing information. So send in the information as soon as it's available. Be cognizant of what semesters will be included in your transcript for when you're sending your transcript. And link this to what you write about in your personal statement, because you're going to be talking about your academic ability and how you did, and maybe how you started off struggling in a course and then, you did well in the end, or things like that. So, just be aware of what they'll see in the transcript. And check in with the admissions person to ensure your application is complete. This personally happened to me when applying to a graduate school. I know that I sent in everything, but they told me that they didn't get a piece of my application through the system. And I only knew that because I emailed them to confirm that they received everything. And what they ended up actually doing kind of leads to the next bullet, was they told me I could just send in an unofficial, I can't remember if it was the transcript or the GRE score actually, but I remember she said, oh, just send in an unofficial copy and we'll make sure to include it in your application. So this may not even be something that's your fault. Things can happen. So just be sure to check in with the admissions person. Usually the contact information for that person that you should contact is on the website with the application. So make sure that everything gets in. If you, for some reason, cannot send your GRE scores or your transcripts because you're applying to a number of institutions, and we'll kind of talk about that in a future slide, ask if you can send in unofficial transcripts or scores. I did this, and there were actually a few institutions that allowed me to send that because I just didn't have the money to send these things to all the institutions that I wanted to apply to. So some may say yes, some may say no, but it doesn't hurt to ask. Yeah. Other things about the GREs and transcripts. They're definitely considered by some schools, and I know this is something that kind of scares people at times because they're like, how are they going to weigh my application when it comes to the requirements? I would first say check the requirements and admissions results of the schools. You may want to choose what I'm terming a safe school, a school where you know that you've met all of the requirements, standard requirements as, you know, laid out on their website. A school where you're like, well, I'm not exactly sure if I could get into this institution because I think, or I found out that this is a very, you know, selective institution, it's hard to get into, or a school that's a reach. You know, a school that you're like, yeah, the odds of me getting here are pretty low, but I'm going to try anyway. So you want to make sure that you have schools in different buckets so that if you aren't, you know, admitted to the school of your choice, that you have another school there as an option. Remember to play up your strengths in your application. Remember to use your personal statement to explain weaknesses and highlight strengths. So even if, you know, your GRE score isn't what you want it to be, or even what the school says they want it to be on their website, there are other places where you can kind of sort of sell yourself as a student and as a potential PhD researcher. So those are the other pieces of your application, and again, that personal statement. Realize that some schools are relying less on these kind of metrics, including bridge programs. So yeah, some schools are definitely going to look at the GRE, but we still strongly encourage you to apply to graduate schools, even if, like I said, your score isn't what you had hoped for. I think I missed pausing on the last slide, so I'll do a long pause on this one if people want to talk about either topics.
Well, a common question that I get is the relative importance of GREs versus the GPA, and I can't speak for all programs, but I think in general, the GPA is viewed as a more important component of applications because it's built over a long period of time and is not involving a test that takes a few hours. So if you're not happy with your GRE score, don't let that deter you from applying to programs if most of the rest of your application looks strong. Because I think a lot of people have questions about what the GRE really tells us about a person's ability to do graduate work, particularly if they have a good GPA and have done research and will get good letters.
Pausing again and see if anybody else wants to add. All right, looking at the next slide. Where to apply? How do you choose a school? I mentioned things like you may want to choose a school that's very selective as one of your reach schools. How do you know which school is like that? Well, definitely peruse the school websites, find out all the information that you can there, but also check out Grad School Shopper. Really great resource for physics graduate schools. I'm sure that they get the information based on what the institution supplies to them, but many of them, because I actually went on there and I looked at quite a few of the schools on Grad School Shopper, and they tell you the acceptance rate for the school, tell you the number of applications they get, deadlines, some information about housing, research areas, as well as faculty that are there. There's a section for alumni from the institution and other information. So in thinking about which school is a safe school for me or which school is kind of, you know, a reach school for me, you should definitely look at Grad School Shopper and kind of look up the schools there and see what information you can find about the school, as well as looking at the school's websites. Anybody want to add to this? Okay. When should you apply? Well, spring of the year prior is when you want to think about taking the GRE subject test and the general test. So this is spring of the year prior to the year you plan to enroll. You can, if you take it in the spring of the year prior, that gives you a second opportunity to take it. So that means you can take it once with like no pressure, and then you can take it again in the fall. It's usually offered twice in September and October, and you know, do better than you did the last time. The summer of the year prior is when you want to decide on the schools to which you're going to apply. Determine which are your safe schools, determine which are your reach schools, determine which are the schools that are kind of in between for you. Look at their application requirements and be sure that you know their deadlines. Early fall of the year prior is when you're going to be completing the application pieces and asking faculty to review it. I don't know how many students we have online, whether you're juniors or seniors, but if you're seniors and you haven't done these things, get to them ASAP because the deadlines are usually in the fall, probably like right about now through December. But if you're, you know, in your junior year, it's never too late to start, but that means spring of next year. So just coming, once we come back off like the winter break is when you want to get started on preparing for taking the GREs and getting those knocked out in the spring. And yeah, last bullet, like I mentioned, late fall is usually when the applications are going to be due. Anybody want to add to this? Okay. So that was actually our final slide. So we will transition into the question and answer section of this webinar.
Okay. All right, we're going to start off with a question that was submitted via email. And the question is, in what ways did your lifestyle change in graduate school compared to your undergraduate experience?
Wow, that's a good question. That takes a while to think of an answer to. There were a lot of things that changed for me in graduate school as well as from transitioning from undergrad to grad school. One is the way that I manage my time and also decision making. So I'll just mention one example, but I think that's a loaded question. But as an example, when I made decisions and things that worked for me as an undergrad, like I could take a lot of courses. I took usually more than the full-time load as an undergrad, but as a graduate student, not possible at all. The level, especially if you're going from the bachelor straight to the PhD, the content is usually at a higher level. But then just the time that it takes to study, to do homeworks, the expectation for you is completely different. So one thing that impacts that, for example, is travel. I lived like hour and 15-minute bus ride from my home to my undergraduate institution. And that was okay because I studied on the bus and things like that. In graduate school, we always say, do not do that. You want to live near campus. Being an hour away from campus is not good because you will find that you need so much more time to be with your peers and study groups and talking to the professors and things like that, and having access to the resources that are available to you on campus. That's like just one small example of how things changed. I don't know that that answers your question, but I feel like I say, that's a loaded question because there are a lot of things that change, from time management, resources that you need. Like, you don't know those resources till you get there, the way you make decisions. Yeah, there's a lot that changes. I will say that the APS does have a webinar that we do, an induction webinar that's recorded, where we actually talked about some of those things. I'm sure that it's available on the website, and I don't know if Erica can tell you how to access that, but there was a first, I think he was still in his first year graduate student, and me talking about those kind of things on that webinar.
Yeah, I can try to find the link for that webinar, and I will drop it in the chat box, which I believe everybody should be able to access. And I can, yeah. I was just going to answer the question, the ways my lifestyle's changed. So I moved from Atlanta, Georgia, to cold Providence, Rhode Island when I went to graduate school. I'm from Rhode Island, but I went running as soon as I could get out of high school to get away from the cold, and here I was back again. So that was the transition. That's something that you should really consider when you're choosing particular places or schools to go to. Whether or not the weather there, the climate, all of that will be an issue for you. So that changed. Also, as mentioned in my introduction, I was coming from an all-women's HBCU and then immediately transitioning into a Ivy League PWI, so predominantly white institution. So that was definitely also a culture change as well. I navigated it pretty well, but it's something to keep in mind. But just as Geraldine said, just sort of transitioning into the grad student frame of mind of learning how to study differently, being able to prioritize, time management, that kinds of things. Were all things that I sort of had to learn that affected my lifestyle as a graduate student as opposed to an undergrad. I still had fun. I made some lifelong friends in graduate school, developed an amazing support system, all of those things. But it was a different experience.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. I think the answers you've heard are exactly right. It's a very different lifestyle. As an undergrad, your emphasis is taking courses, and it's much more structured. You're told more or less what courses you need to graduate. In grad school, the emphasis is much less on courses. It's ultimately a research degree. You will take some courses early on, but as was already mentioned, they're usually higher level courses. You'll take fewer of them, and eventually you'll transition out of taking courses and you'll be focusing on research. And so you have to be able to adapt to that new style where you're in a very unstructured environment. You're supposed to be working on a research problem that nobody knows quite what the answer is, and you have to become the expert in that particular field. And that takes some adjustment for some undergrads who are used to dealing with mostly just coursework. There's also a lot more juggling in general. You might be, in addition to taking classes, you'll be doing research, you might be teaching. A lot of the grad students will serve as teaching assistants, and I know some undergrads do that, but many don't. And so having to juggle these sort of multiple hats is something that takes some of the undergrads who transition to grad school a little bit of an adjustment.
Okay, the next question we have is, what is considered a strong GPA, an okay GPA, or a GPA that raises a red flag?
So,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Geraldine.
no, go ahead. I was actually going to ask you to take this, having been
Sure.
on the admissions committees.
Well, it's a tough question to answer because it really depends on the school. Different schools will have different standards for what they would like to see. So that's why the resource that Geraldine mentioned, which is this grad school shopper, is so valuable. You can go and look at what their typical average GPA of an admitted student is to see what they view as a strong GPA and a weak GPA, etc. I think certainly you want to try to have GPAs significantly above 3.0 on a 4-point scale. But I know there are programs that will accept students even below that. It's also complicated because it depends on, we don't look at just one thing. We don't look at just the GPA, we look at research letters. So if your GPA is a little bit weaker, but you have very, very strong research experience and letters of recommendation, then that can go a long way to compensating for a weaker GPA. But ultimately, I think all programs are interested in making sure that you can do well in their graduate program and their courses, and so that's why the GPA is a significant component of the application. But again, I think looking at different programs, looking at Grad School Shopper to see what the typical admitted GPA of students is a good way of telling whether you have a strong GPA for that program or a weaker GPA for the program. But bear in mind that we're looking at the entire application package. So a really low a low GRE or a low GPA does not necessarily rule you out if other things compensate and look strong.
Okay. What steps should I take to get into a physics PhD program if I don't have a physics degree?
So I can start with that. I mean, that's a good question. We actually now get quite a few applications from students who don't have don't have degrees in physics. And as far as we're concerned, if you have the core set of courses that we require to make you well prepared for our graduate program, and even if you're a little short of those, if we think that you have a close enough approximation of what our undergraduate curriculum is that you can take some extra courses when you come here, then we would accept, and we have accepted students even without degrees in physics. So if you take courses in physics, if you take intermediate level courses in physics and mechanics and E&M and quantum mechanics and statistical mechanics and things like that, but you don't have a physics degree, then we would certainly consider applicants as long as you have that background.
I'll add that there are some bridge programs that are affiliated with the APS bridge program that have taken a few students that, not necessarily through the APS bridge program, but through their own bridge program that don't have physics bachelor's degrees. In particular, there are some master's granting institutions, so they don't offer the PhD, but they offer a bridge. So they take students with bachelor's degrees that aren't in physics, kind of prepare them for the PhD, and they get a master's degree in physics along the way. I shouldn't really say along the way. I should say they get a master's degree in physics at that institution, but with the idea that they're going to go on for a PhD in physics somewhere else. So definitely the contact information is still up, but if you're interested in schools like that, you can reach out to the members of the APS Bridge program, and they can tell you about the schools that we're aware of that have been successful with students through the master's degree Bridge program.
Thanks, Geraldine. I was just about to plug the Bridge program, but yes, if you are interested in getting a PhD in physics but don't necessarily feel ready, the Bridge program is a really great way to get access to a large number of institutions who are very much geared towards supporting and helping students who may have a few things missing get what they need in order to be successful and to thrive in a physics PhD program. So you can, if you want more information, you can email me or Brianne or visit the APS Bridge website.
Okay, this next question is for Lance. Assuming that you are confident in your ability to transition into graduate school, what is the most effective way you have seen an applicant convince the committee that this is the case?
Well, we want to see students who, as I mentioned earlier, grad school is quite a bit different than undergrad in that your emphasis is getting involved in research and dealing with all the sometimes frustrations of doing research and tackling problems that arise that you can't anticipate. And that's a very different experience than you're used to typically as an undergrad. So one of the things we really are looking for are people who have experienced that, which is why it's so important to have a research, undergraduate research experience, so you know that you even like doing research. But secondly, we like to have an idea that this is something you want to continue doing in graduate school. So that's really the most important thing. The other important thing is that you have some ability in that area, and that's where your recommendation letters come in. Somebody who can comment and say, yes, this person has done research and it has a knack for it and is interested in doing it. That level of interest is something that is not communicated in the transcripts or in the GRE scores, but it's absolutely critical to be successful in graduate school since it's a research degree. So we need to see that somewhere in the statement, in the personal statement, the research statement, or the recommendation letters.
Okay, our next question is, how do you develop a strong support system in graduate school?
So again, I think this is one of the topics that we also talked about in the previous webinar. So definitely check that out. I'm saying this particularly to the person who asked that question because it's a great question, but I'll try to speak to it briefly here. When it comes to a support system, there are different kinds of support that you need in graduate school. Like you actually may want academic support. So you want to befriend people within your cohort, graduate students who are starting with you. Like it's going to be really important, especially for students who are in your classes, because you want to be a part of a study group. Even if you know, as an undergrad didn't need to be in a study group, it's going to be important to have that as a graduate student. But then also you want to have in your circle people who've already been through the process. So graduate students who are a little further along in the program, because they're going to give you that critical insight about different research groups, what the expectations are, how to navigate that institution, because every institution is different, and they've already been there. That's kind of like within the department. You want to also seek out mentors. Hopefully there will be faculty reaching out to you to be a mentor to you, but if not, then you also definitely want to be seeking out those mentors. It may not always be your research advisor. So it may be your research advisor. Sometimes, in my case, I have really great relationships with my research advisors, but I do know situations where that's not the case. And when you're talking about a support system and someone who can help you through a number of different kind of issues that might arise, it may be someone else that's not your research advisor, but that you connect to for any number of reasons. Maybe you all are from the same hometown or the same area and you relate because of that. Whatever it is, don't be afraid to reach out to other people. And then also look outside of the physics department. So some institutions have like a graduate student association. They have like a variety of different names, but basically I have like a graduate student association that is for physics students. If the institution has that, definitely you want to join that, be active, get to know people there. The institution may also have like just a graduate student association that's like for graduate students in all areas. If you are looking to connect with people of the same ethnicity or race as you are, there's usually there might be a Black Graduate Student Association or Hispanic Latino Graduate Student Association. At my institution, there was a Caribbean Graduate Student Association. So you may want to reach out to people there as well. When I think about the support system I have, there's a number of different people that I reach out to for a variety of things. And that's, just because no one person can be everything to any one other person. So realizing kind of what your needs are, as far as maybe you just want friends to hang out with on the weekend. It'd be great if you can find those friends within the physics department, but what if you can't? Then you need to find those friends through other means on campus. So definitely figuring out all the different groups and the people and finding out who you connect with and who are going to become a part of your circle. And I think that's especially important for people who are like going to graduate school far away from home, like I did. I went from Chicago to Miami, and it was a whole new world. So for me, it was really important to build up a support system, and I found that support from people that I met through a variety of groups and things on campus.
Yeah, it's a great question, and Geraldine gave a great answer to it, so I don't have a whole lot to add. But most departments, as she said, have a graduate student association, and when you have opportunities to visit the department, make sure that they do have them. That could help you make a decision about whether to go to that place or not. And definitely take advantage of groups that are outside the department, because that may be another place you can go for some social connections. The other thing I'd emphasize is the group environment. Make sure you'll have an opportunity when you get accepted to a program to go visit the institution, and that's where you have an opportunity to go find out whether the groups you're interested in have an environment, by talking to graduate students in those groups, have an environment that is suitable for you. Because as Geraldine said, it's very, very important that you have a good network within your group and you are comfortable in that group, because that has a lot to do with your success. So make sure that there's a good interaction among the group, and that you can work well with the other group members and with your advisor.
Okay. If we received a low grade in a class, should we talk about that in our grad school application?
My first instinct is to say, if it's just one class that you received a bad grade in, I wouldn't mention it, because you might be drawing attention to something that they may not have noticed on your transcript, like, okay, I just struggled in this one class. Um, if you have like severe weak, I don't know if severe is the right word, but like if you have some like things in your application that really you think might reflect negatively on your ability, then I would explain that overall. But if you have just like one bad grade, or even if it's like one really bad grade or something, and say you retook the class or something like that, I would probably say not to mention it. I would say focus on your strengths and the things that overall the things that have gone really well. But I'll shoot that also to Dr. Cooper and hear what he has to say.
No, that's a good question. It's a very common question that I get, and I agree completely with Geraldine that if it's just one grade, you tend to draw attention to it rather than answer any questions that people will have about it. When I occasionally will see applications where somebody withdrew for an entire semester, or they had a whole semester full of bad grades, and if there's some reason for that, then that's when we can appreciate an explanation. But one bad grade is usually not enough to justify, taking time from your personal statement to address that. I agree completely with Geraldine. Focus on your strengths and don't call attention to minor weaknesses.
Okay, the next question we have is, how do I address my learning disabilities and health issues on my personal statement with regards to school setbacks?
Brianne, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. How do I address my learning disabilities and health issues on my personal statement with regard to school setbacks?
So I'm not sure if the question is, if the person asking the question means like, how do I write it? But I would say like almost what you wrote in your question, which is take out make some space within your personal statement to address the school setbacks and tell your story. Say, I have this disability, and, it makes, I don't know what the issue is, but maybe in a sentence or two, like explain this is the issue and this is what the result of it is, but this is how I've overcome the challenges that it presents. Yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
Yeah, no, so again, I agree with Geraldine. We see this commonly, and it's best handled when you turn it into a strength. That is something that you have dealt with, but you've overcome, and you've successfully completed your degree and done well and been able to do what you needed to do to finish your degree. That's the best way to handle health issues, mental health issues, all sorts of those kinds of issues that many students face. Just explain how you've overcome hurdles and obstacles and been successful.
Okay. What was your favorite thing about graduate school?
I really liked doing research. I liked teaching. I really enjoyed sort of having more ownership over what I was learning and feeling like I was making a contribution to science and to the world. Graduate school was hard, don't get me wrong. There were really tough times, but every time I was able to overcome or to talk about my research in a really intelligent manner, I was really proud of myself, and made me feel really good, feeling like I was finally able to give back. So I like that about grad school.
I will echo that it's really nice to like have your own project. You know, like you have your own thing that you're contributing to the world. So that was really great. I don't know if I can pick a favorite thing that quickly, but I'll also say it was really great for me to be exposed to research that other people were doing. It's really important in graduate school that you go to the seminars and other events that your department holds. And so, like, sometimes they might have a colloquium, they'll invite, you know, students to go, and you'll have a speaker from another institution come. For me, that was really exciting because I was in an interdisciplinary group. So, I was able to find out about research opportunity, not research opportunities, but like research that was going on that I just wasn't aware of. So I guess my exposure to all the different things that you could do in and with physics was really exciting for me.
Well, it's been a long time since I was a graduate student, but I know from the graduate students I interact with that and have graduated is in spite of the fact that it is often a little stressful because you do have to take ownership and and there's a freedom there. You get to own your own project and think about your own project, and ultimately you're going to be the world's expert in something. Most students love that. And most students look back on grad school as being one of their favorite times of their lives. So it really is a great experience. It's a little bit of an adjustment from undergrad because, as we've already mentioned, it's quite a bit different than being an undergrad. But most students really come to love that freeness. You may have your first job as a teaching assistant. You take ownership of a research project that is your own, and so whenever you're successful with it, that's something you can feel very proud of and look back on. So it's overall very, very positive experience.
Okay. When you are addressing your intended area of study in the personal statement, how sure of yourself should you be? Would saying you are open to multiple areas be seen as being uncommitted?
I'll just
So
say,
go ahead,
no,
Geraldine.
no, please, you go ahead.
Okay, okay. I think that there's a fine line here. Occasionally I will see applications where the student lists every subfield of physics that we have, and that doesn't look good. It looks like the student hasn't really thought carefully about what they're interested in doing. On the other hand, there's an opposite extreme where you say there's one person who does one thing that you want to work on, and that's also dangerous because that person may not be taking on students, or they may retire, so it's a little dangerous to put all your eggs in one basket. So I think, look over the web pages of the schools you're interested in, and think of reasonably a few areas that you might be interested in. I think it's fine to list a couple of areas. We don't expect you as undergrads to know what you want to do. In fact, if you tell us that you know what you want to do, we know you're not telling us the truth because you don't know enough about what's out there yet. I would say, a third of the undergrads that apply to our program and come to our program end up doing something completely different than what they put on their application. And that's simply because they come here and they see something that they didn't know about, and they get interested in it. So we don't really expect you to know definitively what you want to do, but you do want to have thought a little bit about what looks at least interesting to you and list a few areas without listing every single subfield in the department.
Okay. Would it be worthwhile to mention in my application past research experience that does not relate to my research interest in grad school?
I would say yes. You want to talk about transferable skills. So the skills that you gained from that research experience may definitely make it easy for you to transition into another lab, even though the research area is different. So yes, you want to talk about whatever previous research experience you had, but again, with a focus on the skills that you gained.
Absolutely. Most research experiences are on some level, very generic. You're given a problem that you don't have an answer to. You have to figure out a solution to that. You have to study it. You've got to overcome hurdles. And whether it's in the field you're interested in or even in physics, knowing something about that experience will tell us something about your ability to handle open-ended problems and deal with obstacles, all of which are common to all different research areas. So certainly you should tell us about whatever research experience you have in whatever field it is.
Did you experience imposter syndrome? And if so, how do you deal with it?
I have experienced imposter syndrome, and I deal with it by kind of validating myself, reminding myself that I do belong where I am, whether it's like, I mean, I experienced it in school and I experience it now. Unfortunately so, but I do. So just reminding myself that I am where I belong work-wise and that I deserve to be here. And then also just positive affirmations. I sometimes do them in the form of songs that I listen to that are positive affirmations for me. I want to endorse the artist because we're on a recorded webinar who I listen to, but often has songs that are like very positive. But yeah, also seeking the support, surrounding yourself, like someone mentioned the support system in one of the earlier questions, surrounding yourself with people who also will give you that same validation that you're working to give yourself. There are other techniques that you can do to negate negative self-talk. There are a lot of different ways to do it. Meditation is one thing that I do, learning to block negative talk. Yeah, those are some of the things that I do. I'll also say there are resources out there there is a website like dedicated to imposter syndrome where they look at research on imposter syndrome. So you may also want to kind of look at that resources in addition to hearing, what others on the webinar have to say and see what they say research-wise works for dealing with that.
I was just going to say I've also experienced imposter syndrome. I can't think of anybody who really hasn't that I know of. Grad school is hard. It's difficult, particularly in the beginning where you're trying to transition, and sometimes you can be a little bit harder on yourself than you need to be. So what actually helped me was being open about it, talking about it with my friends and saying, I'm feeling really self-conscious about this, and, I'm not sure that I really belong here. You'll be surprised how many people will be like, I totally feel the same way, and I can't believe you feel like that because you're awesome. So having someone around who understands sort of what you're going through and can also be, self-affirmations are great. You should definitely do that, but it also helps to have someone there to be affirming for you when you can't do it for yourself.
Yeah, I think Erica said something very important, which I think everybody to some degree suffers from this a little bit. In physics, there are lots of smart people around. I've met some of the most decorated people that I know that have expressed some degree of self-doubt. So it's very natural, and don't think you're the only person who deals with it. Another important thing to say is that we tend to think, well, this person is perceived as smart, therefore they deserve to be here doing research. The cool thing about research is it's not always who you perceive to be the smartest person who comes up with the innovative idea, and bringing your unique perspective and your unique experiences is often much more important to solving interesting problems and to doing interesting research than what your GRE score is or whatever criteria you want to come up with for intelligence. So that's why it's important to get as many people from whatever areas involved in research, because your unique experiences can make the difference in understanding a problem one way that's important that somebody else may not see.
All right, well, this is all the time we have today for the official webinar. We apologize if we didn't get to your questions today, but we welcome you to follow up with Erica or myself by phone or email. You will receive an email from us containing a link to the recording of today's presentation and a survey question that needs to be answered as soon as possible.